28 years ago, Captain Aaron Holt stood before the Grand Council of Terra. The great hall was filled with the sound of voices whispering and cameras clicking. The floor was made of shining stone, and the tall ceiling rose high above with banners of the Terran Dominion. It should have been a place of pride for any man who had served his homeworld. But for Aaron, it was the place where his name would be ruined forever. He stood straight, his hands locked behind his back, staring at the woman who ruled them all, Queen Celeste. Her golden uniform and calm face showed power, but her eyes were cold. Around her, the members of the council looked nervous. They all knew what was about to happen. "Captain Aaron Holt," the Queen said in a strong voice that echoed through the hall. "You are charged with disobedience, with treason against the Dominion, and with refusing my direct command." Aaron said nothing. He could feel thousands of eyes on him, and millions more from the live broadcast across the system. Everyone would see him fall. Cameras hovered around, recording every movement, every look, every breath. But his face did not move. His silence made the hall colder. The Queen turned toward the screen behind her, showing a replay from a recent battle. Her fleet had found a rebel colony on a green moon. According to the order, the colony was to be destroyed, but Aaron had refused. He had shut down his ship's weapons and ordered his crew to stand down. He had chosen life instead of obedience. She faced him again. "You defied me. You made the Dominion appear weak. Because of your choice, enemies now believe they can challenge us." Still, he stood quiet. His eyes were calm, but there was pain there, deep and buried. He looked not at the Queen, not at the Council, but past them, as if his thoughts were elsewhere, on those innocent people he had refused to harm. The crowd waited for him to speak. Some wanted him to beg for forgiveness. Some wanted to see him broken, but when he finally opened his mouth, he said nothing. One breath, one look, and then silence again. The guards shifted uneasily. "Very well," said the Queen coldly. "You are stripped of rank and command. Your name will be removed from our records. You will never again serve the Dominion." He did not fight it. He only gave a small nod, as if he had expected it long ago. The Queen raised her hand, and the royal seal flared on the screen behind her, glowing red. The cameras focused on his face. But there was no sign of fear or anger, only a quiet sadness that seemed far older than the man himself. He turned, stepped down from the platform, and walked slowly through the line of guards. The crowd parted as he passed, uncertain whether to pity him or envy his courage. There was a strange kind of dignity in his silence, something noble that no punishment could take away. Outside, the city was bright and full of noise. The towers of TerraPrime sparkled under the sun, and airships moved lazily across the sky. Aaron walked down the long marble steps of the royal citadel. People watched from every side. Some whispered his name, some spat as he passed, but not once did he look back. He kept walking. The path led away from the city, down through the markets, across the transport docks, till the crowd was gone, and there was only the open sky and the wind. He reached a quiet landing field on the edge of the desert, where an old ship waited. It was small and worn from years of service, but it was his. He stood beside it for a while, staring at the horizon. Then he took one last look at the shining towers behind him. There was no sound when he stepped aboard. The engines hummed softly, the ramp closed, and the ship lifted off the ground. No one in the city saw which direction it went. The cameras that had followed him for weeks shut down one by one, and his signal vanished from every system. By the end of that day, Aaron Holt was gone. The Queen returned to her throne, acting as if his name meant nothing to her. Yet that night, the palace guards swore they saw her standing alone by the window, staring into the stars. He had chosen silence and disappeared. Amy thought he was dead. Others said he would come back. But deep inside, even those who hated him felt something strange, a quiet fear that maybe, one day, his silence would speak louder than their power. 28 years had passed since Captain Aaron Holt had vanished into the far reaches of space. Time had washed over TerraPrime like a slow tide. The Queen's dominion had grown larger in numbers, but weaker in heart. What once felt like strength now looked like fear wearing gold. The people still bowed to Queen Celeste, but they did so with trembling hands instead of pride. The queen ruled from the high palace that floated above the capital city, a shining dome of glass and steel. Every morning, she stood by the great window, overlooking her empire. She still looked young because science in her world had found ways to hold back age. Yet, behind the brightness of her face were eyes that no longer carried warmth. Her reflection showed someone who had conquered everything but peace. Outside the palace, things were falling apart. Criminal groups ruled the lower decks of the city. The workers of the outer colonies complained that food was scarce. Fuel that once burned bright now came in short supply. Ships turned from proud white to dull gray because no one cared to clean them anymore. People whispered that the Dominion had lost its soul the day Aaron Holt disappeared. In the space between those whispers lived stories. They were told in old cargo pits, on dusty mining moons, and in smoky trade stations floating far from law. Stories of a man who didn't die, who didn't surrender, but became something greater. They called him the silent captain or the ghost of the border. Some said he led a secret fleet made up of forgotten officers, men and women who believed in old values. Others said he had found a distant world where people lived free, away from the Queen's rule, growing stronger in peace. No one knew which version was true, but the name Aaron Holt still moved through the stars like a quiet promise. Back on TerraPrime, Queen Celeste's council worried. She listened to them talk day and night about rebellions, about losses, about strange sightings near the edge of known space. Reports came from scouts about ships that carried no signal, no name, and no flag, but still moved in perfect formations. They acted like soldiers, but for no army anyone recognized. One evening, she sat alone in the throne room. The lights shone soft against the wide walls, and she rested her crown beside her on the arm of the chair. Her second advisor, an old friend named Raymond, entered quietly. He had served her for over 30 years, and was one of the few who dared to speak freely. "Your Majesty," he said, keeping his eyes low, "the outer colonies are restless. They talk about a man who used to serve you. They talk about his return." "Stories," she said, her voice steady. "The kind of stories frightened people invent when they lose faith." "Yes, perhaps," Raymond said carefully. "But stories are powerful when truth is tired." She didn't answer. For a moment he thought she might dismiss him, but she simply stood and walked toward the window. The stars above Terra shone faint and distant. "I gave my whole life to make this Dominion strong," she said quietly. "I sacrificed even mercy. And now they tell tales of a man who turned from me and vanished into myth." Raymond looked at her, noticing the faint tremor in her hand as she held the edge of the glass. "Perhaps strength alone cannot hold an empire," he said softly. Late that night, alone in her private chamber, the Queen pulled up old records she had buried long ago. There was his file, still there in the archives, though it had been erased from every public record. She opened the last report from the day he vanished, showed a soundless image of his ship lifting from the desert. She stared at it for a long time, her breath quiet and slow. For the first time in years, she whispered his name. Far away, beyond the borders of recorded space, a different kind of silence lived. A ship drifted through the night, its engines hidden behind clouds of soft light. Inside that ship, Aaron Holt sat in the command chair, his hair now clear silver, his hands marked with lines of time. Around him stood a small crew, men and women from forgotten worlds. They worked without rush or fear. He looked at the main panel, where a soft light blinked rhythmically. Data flowed in gentle streams, coordinates appearing and disappearing. Then he looked out the window, where stars burned steady. It had been a long wait. I'd watched the Dominion rise higher and fall from its own pride. He had trained new generations quietly, built fleets in silence, and waited for the moment when history would call again. That moment was close now. He could see it in the way the galaxy seemed to shift, in the unrest of the colonies, in the hunger for something true. He closed his eyes and sighed. 28 years, he murmured. A young officer, no more than 20, turned to him. "Captain, are we going back?" He opened his eyes, calm but filled with purpose. "Yes," he said softly. "It's time the Dominion remembers the cost of silence." Then he stood, the stars reflecting in his eyes like soft fire, and for the first time in many years, the engines of his ship began to glow bright again. The message reached TerraPrime in the quiet hours just before dawn. The control stations across the capital picked up a single signal that forced every communication screen to flicker. It carried no sound at first, only a faint rhythm, like the pulse of a human heart. Then, from the silence, words appeared on the main display. "I am returning to finish what you stopped me from doing, Celeste." That was all. No voice, no insignia, no source. The signal vanished after 5 seconds, but in those 5 seconds, the Dominion shuddered. Every officer in the palace knew the name of the Queen. Everyone also remembered the man who had once stood before her in silence 28 years ago. The Queen was woken from her bed by the sound of alarms. Her personal aide, Lila, entered the chamber with a startled look. "Your Majesty, we have received a coded transmission. Security believes it came from beyond the border zone." Celeste sat up at once. "Show me." The young aide brought up the message. The words shone clearly across the air like a scar. Celeste's face turned as pale as moonlight. She whispered the name she had not spoken aloud in so many years. Aaron Holt. Within an hour, every network on TerraPrime was broadcasting the news. The ghost from the past had spoken. Admirals and council members stormed into the palace, arguing about defense lines and fleet positions. Some said it was a hoax, others said it was a provocation from rebels. But deep down, they all felt the same thing: fear. In the command center of the palace, screens glowed with maps of known space. Ships were ordered into new patrol routes. The Queen's highest advisor, Raymond, stood beside her once again. "Should we prepare for attack?" he asked quietly. She did not answer him right away. Her eyes were fixed on the image of Terra's main orbit. "He will not attack," she said at last. "If he wanted war, he would have started it 28 years ago." Raymond looked uncertain. "Then why send a message now?" Celeste turned away from the screens and faced him. "'Cause he's telling me he has returned. It's not as a soldier, but as something greater." Meanwhile, far beyond their reach, Aaron Holt's ship cut through deep space with quiet grace. Its surface reflected the light of distant stars. Inside the control room, every crew member worked in silence, guided more by faith than by commands. They had followed the captain for years, never questioning why. He had rescued them from broken colonies and dying stations, rebuilt their hope, and taught them what true leadership looked like. A young engineer named Eli watched Captain Holt from across the deck. "Sir," he said slowly, "they'll know by now." The message was sent. The Dominion will be watching every corner of the sky. Aaron nodded without looking away from the stars. Let them watch. They built their walls with pride. I only need to open one door. "Are we going straight to TerraPrime?" Eli asked. "Yes," Aaron said simply. "But not to fight." He looked down at the panel, showing their course. His hand brushed the edge of an old, faded map. It displayed the colony that had changed everything all those years ago. The green moon he once refused to destroy was now a beacon of life. The people there had built thriving cities, sharing knowledge, medicine, and energy freely. They had no rulers. They owed nothing to any throne. They called themselves the Freeborn. And they were ready to return not to conquer, but to offer humanity something new. On TerraPrime, the Queen met with her military staff again. The room crackled with nervous energy. Admiral Lorne, a firm and loyal soldier, slammed his hand on the table. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, we must not hesitate. If Holt returns, he must be captured immediately. His presence could incite rebellion." But Celeste did not look at him. She stared at a live feed from her orbital defense system. Her thoughts drifted years into the past, to the day she had stripped Aaron of his rank, to his silent face, his calm defiance, his eyes filled with mercy rather than rage. She spoke at last. "Prepare the defenses. Do not attack unless I order it." The Admiral started to argue, but her tone ended the discussion. She left the room and walked down the empty palace corridor to her private chambers. The walls glowed softly with old paintings of heroes and wars that had built the Dominion. She paused before one that showed her younger self standing victorious beside a burning city. The pride in that painting felt empty now. That night, she dreamed she was standing in the council hall again. The same marble underfoot, the same lights above. In the silence, she saw Aaron standing at the far end of the hall. Older, quieter, but still holding the same strength in his eyes. He said nothing. Then the dream dissolved into light. The next morning, every radar across the capital detected a massive object entering orbit. The skies shimmered bright white, as if the sun itself had shifted. When the clouds parted, one ship hovered above the planet. It was larger than any Dominion cruiser, yet it moved with perfect balance. It bore no flag, no symbol, no weapon pointed toward the ground. Instead, it remained still, proud, and silent. On the palace balcony, Queen Celeste stepped into the sunlight and looked up. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away. Her breath caught as she recognized the ship. It was his. Her aides waited for her command, but she said nothing. She simply whispered to herself, "The man I silenced has finally spoken." The image of the ship above TerraPrime spread like fire through every city and colony. People stopped working, looked up at the sky, and saw the large dark shape hanging silently in orbit. It did not fire any weapons, did not send any message, and did not move. It just stayed there, calm and quiet, as if watching the whole world below. In the palace, soldiers ran through the corridors, shouting orders and carrying rifles. The queen stood before the wide glass window, her face pale as she watched the ship. Raymond stood behind her, waiting for her to speak, but she said nothing for a long time. The air between them was heavy with memories. At last, she said softly, "He has come back." Raymond nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And he has come alone." No escort, no fleet, no visible weapons. The queen turned her eyes to the stars above. Never needed weapons to be dangerous. The doors opened. Admiral Lorne entered quickly. We have surrounded the ship with our cruisers, awaiting your command to attack." "Has he sent any communication?" the queen asked. "No, nothing since the first message," the admiral replied. "We do not even know how the ship stays in orbit. Our scans cannot read its engines." The queen looked thoughtful. "But stand by, do not attack." Lorne frowned. "Your Majesty, with respect, hold your fire," she said sharply. "That is an order." The admiral hesitated, then bowed and left. Raymond remained silent, watching her closely. He could see the struggle inside her. She had spent years building power with fear and control. Now a single silent man threatened to undo it all. The queen turned from the window. "Prepare the landing platform," she said. "If he wishes to see me, he will come." Outside, the ship slowly began to move. Without any visible thrusters, it drifted toward the royal citadel. Its movement was smooth and graceful. As it descended through the clouds, people gathered in the streets to watch. No one screamed, no one ran. They only stood still, staring in awe. Some whispered prayers. Some whispered his name. Aaron Holt stood at the front of his ship, looking down at the world he had once served. Many years, so many changes, yet everything still carried the same light he had sworn to protect. His eyes were steady, but there was sadness in them, not anger, only sorrow. Eli, the young engineer, looked uncertain. "Captain, are you sure this is wise? She could have you arrested the moment you step on her palace floor?" Aaron smiled faintly. "I did not return to hide. It is time to finish what pride once destroyed." When his ship touched down on the landing platform, the air shimmered. A small group of palace guards stood waiting in two lines. The queen waited at the far end of the platform, surrounded by gold banners. She stood tall, though the beating of her heart echoed in her chest. Aaron walked down the ramp calmly. His coat moved with the wind, and his boots hit the stone without hesitation. The guards raised their weapons but did not fire. Something about his presence made them lower their hands slowly. Carried no weapon, no armor, only the strength of quiet truth. He stopped a few steps in front of the queen. For a moment, neither spoke. The whole of Terra seemed to wait. Finally, she said, "You destroyed me all those years ago." Aaron looked at her calmly. "No, Celeste, you destroyed yourself. I only refused to help you do it faster." Her lips trembled slightly, turned against your oath. "I kept it," he said. "I swore to serve humanity, not to crush it." She looked away, her hands tightening around her cloak. "That colony you protected, they betrayed the Dominion. They refused control. They found freedom," he answered. "They discovered power that could heal what the Dominion was breaking. You feared that because it did not belong to you?" He reached into his coat and took out a small device, placed it gently on the ground. Soft light flickered, and a projection glowed above it. It showed images of the colony, the forests that had once been ash now full of green life, the rivers clean, the cities built with harmony instead of walls. The people were human, happy, and strong. They had forged peace without rulers. Her eyes widened. How is that possible? They learned, he said quietly. They remembered what mercy means. The queen stepped closer, staring at the moving images. The voices of children laughing filled the hall from the tiny projector. For a moment, she forgot the soldiers and the protocol and saw the faces of people she had once sworn to protect but had used instead. Aaron spoke again, his voice low but clear. I did not return for revenge. I came to remind you what we fought for. Humanity was never meant to rule by fear. She turned her eyes toward him. And if I refuse to listen, he sighed, then your dominion will fall whether I speak or stay silent. The world no longer belongs to your fear. For a long time the wind blew across the platform, carrying no sound but the hum of the engines. The queen stared at him, torn between pride and regret. Then she said softly, "You are still the same." He gave a small, tired smile. "And you are not beyond change." Before anyone spoke again, thunder rumbled in the distance. The sky above the city glowed faint gold as dozens of ships appeared, ships bearing the mark of the freeborn. They carried no weapons, only light. Across Terra, people gasped as the sky filled with peaceful vessels. Aaron looked back at her. They have come to share, not to fight. The queen's shoulders sagged. For the first time in decades, she felt small not as a ruler, but as a person before truth. She looked up at the sky, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe this is what humanity needed to remember. Aaron said nothing. He simply stood beside her, the silent storm that had returned, not to destroy, but to heal. The morning after the ships of the Freeborn filled the sky above Terra Prime, the world felt still. No bombs exploded, no orders for battle came. The air was quiet except for the soft sound of wind moving through the city towers. People stood on rooftops and in the streets, staring up with wide eyes at the golden ships that floated like calm lights in the clouds. Some cried without knowing why. Others smiled for the first time in many years. Inside the palace, Queen Celeste sat alone in the grand audience chamber. The hall that had once echoed with power now felt hollow. The guards and advisors waited outside, too afraid to disturb her. She sat on the throne, her crown beside her, her hands clasped together. Her mind swam in the memory of Aaron Holt's words. They repeated again and again inside her thoughts, like waves that would not stop. Aaron waited in a nearby chamber. He had spoken to her the night before, but he knew that change never came easy. The queen had built her reign on fear and command. He had no wish to force her now, or take her place. She needed to face the truth herself. From the window, he could see the light of the Freeborn fleet shining softly against the morning sky. His crew had returned to their ship waiting for his signal. They were ready to leave when his part was done. Aaron had never wanted to rule, nor to lead another empire. He wanted only for the next generation to build a world that would never repeat their mistakes. At last, the queen walked into the chamber. Her steps were slower than before. She wore no crown, only a plain robe of white. Aaron turned to face her, his expression calm. For a moment, they stood in silence like two old shadows cast by the same sun.
"You win,"
she said quietly. He shook his head. It's not a victory. She looked at him, confusion flickering across her tired face. Then what do you call it? He paused before answering. A beginning. He walked to the window, pointing toward the golden ships above the city. They came not to conquer but to share what they have learned. They bring knowledge, energy, food, and hope. They will help rebuild what the Dominion has lost. Her voice trembled. And what becomes of me? The choice is yours, he said gently. You can stand beside your people or stand above them. One path will save everything you love. The other will destroy it. For a long time, she said nothing.
Right.
The light of the morning sun brushed their faces. Below, millions of people filled the streets, cheering softly as the first of the golden ships landed. The air shimmered with hope instead of fear. Raymond entered quietly. He bowed before the queen and spoke in a steady voice. Your Majesty, the people are gathering in the squares. They ask to hear your word. They say they will follow whatever you decide." Celeste looked out at them. For the first time, she did not see subjects or servants. She saw what Aaron saw: humans, each one precious, struggling, alive. A weight lifted from her chest. She turned to Aaron. "Will you stand with me?" He nodded once. "I will stand, but not to rule. My place is with those who still believe in what we can become." She gave a faint smile, one that looked more honest than any she had worn in years. Then she walked toward the balcony that faced the main square. Aaron followed her, standing a step behind. When she stepped out, a great silence fell below. Every face turned upward. The queen raised her hands. Her voice carried through the open air, firm but kind. "My people, for too long I have ruled in fear, thought strength meant control. I was wrong. Strength is mercy. Unity is not made with chains, but with trust. The man I once called a traitor has reminded us of our true purpose." The crowd listened, breathless. The wind blew softly, carrying her words from street to street. She continued, "Let us end the age of power and begin the age of peace. Let us open our arms, not our weapons. Let humanity be whole again." When she finished, a wave of sound rose from below. It was not wild cheering, but a deep, heartfelt shout that echoed across the city. People wept, strangers embraced, and from the sky above, beams of warm light shone from the freeborn ships onto the crowded streets. Aaron looked at her quietly. "You found the right words?" She turned, eyes filled with tears. "No, Captain Holt? You gave me the silence that let me find them." He bowed his head slightly. The moment felt complete. As the sun rose higher, he stepped back and left the balcony. He walked down the long marble hall once more, his footsteps echoing in the same rhythm as they had 28 years ago. But this time, no one whispered, no one mocked him, and no one followed to drag him away. The palace doors opened and light spilled across the floor like liquid gold. Outside, his ship waited at the edge of the city. Eli and the crew stood ready. Aaron looked one last time toward the shining towers of TerraPrime, now filled with new hope. He felt a calm smile touch his lips as he whispered softly to himself, "The strongest voice is silence when truth speaks for itself." Then he stepped onto his ship. The engines rose with a warm hum, and the vessel lifted gracefully toward the rising sky, leaving behind a world finally awake after years of silence.